Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Wilson, and I'm an operations specialist with Tri-States Oil Team. I'm here to talk to you about the basics and ethics of bird photography. Since COVID restrictions began and many have been stuck at home, interest in bird watching has soared as people are taking notice of the wonderful and exciting world of wildlife just outside their windows. Some of those discovering or rediscovering this world have taken their appreciation to the next level by capturing images of our avian visitors to share with friends and family, post online for everyone to admire, or to look back on when many of our feathered friends have migrated south for the season. If you fall into this category or are thinking of getting into bird photography, this video is for you. The first thing we want to consider is what type of equipment we'll be using to capture our subjects. So this is my typical setup. It's a Nikon D850 DSLR body with a 200 to 500 millimeter lens, a UV filter, and a lens hood. DSLRs in a setup like that are ideal for wildlife photography because of some of the advantages they offer. Among those are a fast shutter speed, fast autofocus, the ability to take several photos in rapid succession. The cost for a good entry-level DSLR has come down quite a bit in recent years, especially if you're looking to buy an older or used model, which are still perfectly capable of capturing great photos. If a DSLR is not currently in your budget, no worries. You can still capture excellent photos with a point-and-shoot type camera or even your cell phone camera. So now that we've talked about what kind of equipment we're going to use, we want to talk about where we're going to find our subjects. So one of my favorite places to shoot is right in my own backyard. So in this first image here, you can see a cardinal, which is a fairly common bird in most people's backyard, but that doesn't mean that they can't make a striking photo. And one of the advantages to shooting in your own backyard, in this case for me, was that this was during the winter. It's cold outside. I don't want to go outside in the cold to take a photo. Well, this particular tree is overlooked on from my bedroom window, which is where I was able to take this photo, and I never had to go outside in the cold. You'd be surprised at the diversity of birds you'll get on a daily basis or throughout the year. I'm in the middle of a large suburban neighborhood without much in the way of nature nearby, and I still get a ton of bird species ranging from the ubiquitous robin to several woodpecker species to the occasional hawk. If you want to attract a greater variety of species to your yard, like this downy woodpecker, two of the best ways to do so are by adding feeders or planting native plants. So you can see in my feeder here, in addition to a regular birdseed mix, I have some suet, which is where the woodpecker is perched. This is a great way to provide a extra nutritious meal for your visitors, as well as attract other species that you might not see otherwise. This particular woodpecker does actually visit my yard and eat some of the seed, but he definitely has a preference for the suet. One of the other things you can do is adding native plants. So in my yard, I have native plants that both flower and fruit. So the fruit is good for attracting birds, and the ones that flower attract native insects, and native insects also attract native birds. Another great location to shoot is a public park, especially ones with a body of water like a creek or a pond. Public parks are great, not only because you get outside and get some sunshine, but you'll likely find birds there that you might not encounter in your backyard, like this handsome Canada goose. Another advantage to public parks is the birds there may have a smaller escape distance, which I'll go into more detail a little later, but that could be advantageous for people that don't have the advantage of a telephoto lens, because you'll be able to get closer to your subjects. Hiking trails in your local state park are another great option, but they can add another layer of complexity to finding your subject because the trees and underbrush provide a lot of hiding spots. So when you're shooting at a location like a hiking trail, it's important to keep your eyes and ears open. You'll want to watch and listen for movement. So this white-throated sparrow, his coloration can make him difficult to spot if he's just perched and still in the underbrush. But when he moves, that movement will catch your eye, and sometimes they'll make some rustling as they move through the underbrush. And those are the kind of things you want to listen or watch for to get your attention to zero in on your subject. You'll also want to listen for calls and use the sound to zero in on your subject. So the cedar waxwing was in White Clay Creek State Park, and he was way up in a tree, and his coloration kind of blended in with some of the yellows of the sun shining through the foliage. And there was no way I was going to spot him just by walking by. But they have a very distinctive call. So I was able to use that call. I knew exactly what bird I was looking for, and I followed that call to the tree he was in. And then I looked around the tree until I found him, and he was hanging out up there eating some berries. My favorite location to shoot can be the most challenging, but also the most rewarding. And these locations are national wildlife refuges. And they are large with varied habitats and rich species diversity. Also, you can drive through them, meaning you never have to leave your car, which can help mitigate one of the challenges of bird photography, which is scaring away your subject. That might sound counterintuitive, but I'll explain in a little bit. One of the strategies I use in wildlife refuges to locate my subjects is really applicable to any other location, but I find that it works especially well in the refuges. So rather than scanning each individual tree or every inch of a shoreline, I try to take in the whole scene at once. So this marsh wren, there was a lot of them that day, and they're hanging out in the reeds, they're calling, they're moving around, but the reeds are so dense that they were hard to spot. So if you take a step back and take in the whole picture and look at, as much of the reeds as you can at once, it makes it a lot easier to notice motion and then follow that motion to find your subject. So another example I like is if you're looking at a tree line. Everybody knows what trees look like, right? So if you're scanning across the forest edge and everything is green and brown and tree-like, and then you notice a small spot of white amongst the brown and green, you may have just spotted the head of one of the most sought-after subjects, or at least one of my most sought-after subjects, an adult bald eagle. So that white that you spotted warrants a closer look. Other things worth looking closer at include a large dark spot that doesn't fit in with thinner branches, movement that doesn't fit in with the way everything else is moving in the breeze, and anything else that doesn't fit the pattern of the surrounding landscape. If all of this is a little bit of choice overload, you can always search online for best birding in your state, or join a local or online club for birding and photography. Another suggestion regarding locations is to visit frequently and throughout the year. Doing this will help you familiarize yourself with what species are present where and when. For instance, I have found this log where I spent a good 30 minutes with a very cooperative little blue heron to also be popular with green herons, who was also an exceptionally cooperative subject who was comfortable with my presence and fished from his log. Another consideration is time of year. If you want to see babies, you'll have to go at the right time of year. And this photo was taken at Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge in Maryland. They boast one of the, if not the largest, breeding populations of bald eagles in the nation. They have stands set up for bald eagles, and they also have stands set up for osprey nests. And that's what you can see here in this photo. It's a mama or a papa osprey delivering a meal for their 3 chicks. If this is something you're interested in seeing or taking photos of, you have to make sure you show up at the right time of year. Similarly, some species are only present at certain times of year. This tundra swan, surrounded by snow geese, can only be seen at the time of year that they are migrating through our area. So if you want to see them, you have to show up when they're there. The more you show up at the same location, the easier it's going to be to spot your subjects now that you know the landscape. You'll also learn which locations are best for composition and lighting. So now that we know where we can find birds, what else do we need to consider before we start shooting? Well, time of day is important too. Typically, birds will be most active during early morning or late afternoon, nocturnal birds being the exception. I personally prefer to start before sunrise and hang around until the best light is passed. But you're not limited to shooting during these hours. But if you're trying for good composition, paying attention to the time of day will help improve your chances for a good shot. It's also advisable, when possible, to position yourself with the sun at your back so your subject is well lit. This is not a hard and fast rule. In this image, you can see that because the sun is behind my back, my subject is well lit, and I also got a nice reflection off the water surface. I'd like to point out here that you don't necessarily need to have a well-lit subject to make for a good photo. Silhouettes can also make for great photos. I'd also like to point out that shooting on cloudy days has its advantages as well. Clouds diffuse the light and often provide an even, soft light. Often on cloudy days, I'll shoot longer because I don't have the added difficulty of dealing with a harsh, bright sun, especially on white birds like egrets. So in addition to time of day, you also want to consider your background. What's in the background is important when composing a good photo. Now, I know I'm talking about bird photography, and this is a photo of a fox. And the photo of the fox itself would have been fine, but what for me really makes this photo is the ominous, blurry black and red of the red-winged blackbird closing in quickly on this poor fox's rear end. This blackbird would not leave this poor little guy alone all afternoon. Another thing you want to consider is a bird with dark plumage against a dark background isn't going to stand out. Herons aren't especially dark birds, but positioning it in front of a very dark background really makes the subject in this photo stand out. It pops, it draws the viewer's eye to your subject. Also keep in mind, your photos don't have to be tight portraits. I could have made several good photos out of this situation. We have the guy on the right, the turkey vulture on the right, sunning himself with his wings spread wide. We have the one on the far left, kind of, giving him a funny look. I could have zoomed in on any one of these birds and gotten some great shots. Instead, I took in the whole picture and zoomed out a little bit and got in the top of this dilapidated barn roof. And it adds something else to the photo that I think would have been missing had I just focused on the birds. So when you're looking through your viewfinder, pause for a second and look at what's beyond your subject. Capturing behavior can make for a more compelling photo. This particular shot, freezing the wings of a hummingbird in flight, might be tough or even impossible to do without the fast shutter speed and autofocus of a DSLR. But using a point and shoot or a cell phone camera should allow you to capture some nice action shots. Behavioral cues can help you accomplish this. For instance, did you know that birds tend to take off and land into the wind? So if you're shooting somewhere where there's a body of water and you see a flock of geese circling overhead and it looks like they're going to land, you can quickly take notice of which direction the wind is blowing and use that information to try to position yourself for the best shot. Also, did you know that raptors tend to poop just before takeoff? I spent about 20 minutes with this eagle while he was having a meal in this tree, and I wasn't able to quite zoom in as far as I would have liked, and there wasn't a whole lot going on with the background. So I figured I'd hang out for a while and try to catch an action shot. And after sitting there for a while, I noticed that he pooped, as you can see in this shot. And as expected, about 4 photos later, here he is taking off. So I saw him do something that indicates that he's probably going to do something else that I'd like to photograph. And I use that information to get prepared, get my camera in position to capture the shot that I wanted. You should try to focus on the eyes or at the eye facing you when shooting a profile when you're shooting your subject. Doing so helps create a bond between the subject and the viewer, and it makes for better composition. And finally, you want to take lots of shots. For every shot I select, process, and post online, I have hundreds that I delete and dozens that I keep but are not quite good enough to put out there. So now that we're prepared to get out there and start photographing birds, we need to consider that these birds are living things with rich and interesting lives to live, and they'd prefer to live just like all of us, as stress-free as possible. And we need to treat them with respect for the inherent value that they have. And when we photograph wildlife, we want to have as little impact on them as possible. Sometimes that goal can be at odds with getting that shot you want so bad, but that's the way we have to do it. So here are some things to keep in mind when shooting. Birds have great eyes. They see you coming, and to them, you are at best a potential threat and at worst a predator actively hunting them. They all have an escape distance. It'll vary from species to species and individual to individual, but all birds have an area around them that once breached by a potential threat will cause the bird to flee. The osprey pictured here was perched up in a snag, and I was in my vehicle on the road maybe 150 feet away. That was too close for this osprey. It was uncomfortable with my presence, and it took off, leaving me with a somewhat blurry shot. Contrast that with this cormorant, who was maybe 25 feet away from me. And I wasn't there alone. There was two other photographers just as close. This cormorant didn't have a care in the world. He was comfortable enough with the presence of three photographers very close that he was willing to preen in front of us. He had no concern of escape. Never approach a bird with the intent of making it fly or flee. We want to avoid crossing that escape distance line. Making a bird flee causes undue stress and energy expenditure. It'll also make the bird less comfortable in the presence of any photographers that come after you. If you're approaching a bird and it moves away from you, maybe just a few hops or a few branches away, that's a good indication it's not happy with how close you are and you should stop. If a bird freezes and hunches into a protective, aggressive, or pre-flight posture, it means you're too close. So how do we approach our subject when we're too far away to get that shot we want? In a word, patience. Move slowly. Approach when the bird is looking away. Raise your camera slowly. When I'm approaching a subject, I usually take photos as I approach. I'll take a few photos, pause, take a step or two, and repeat. And by step, I mean anywhere from a full stride to inches. It can sometimes take several minutes to get as close as I want to a subject, which can feel like forever, especially when you're out in the marsh and getting swarmed by biting flies. But it's the only way to do it. It took me a good 15 minutes to get from where I was in the previous shot to where I am in this shot. And it was worth the patience because I got a nice close-up shot that I wanted. Some other things that can help you get closer to your subject are clothing choice, blinds, and remote triggers. Darker earth tone colors are preferable. Camo clothing is an option too. And bright colors may be more alarming to birds. Using blinds to hide behind so your subjects can't see you is a great option too. This is one of the ways your car may be helpful when shooting in a wildlife refuge. It can function sort of like a blind. Sometimes birds will be less concerned about a car than they are a person on foot, allowing you to shoot from your car window. And this is pretty much exclusively how I shoot in wildlife refuges. Remote triggers allow you to position your camera in one location and trigger the shutter from somewhere else, ideally from cover. This is a great option shooting birds from a feeder. I have my tripod set up, pointed at my feeder, and then I go inside my screened-in porch, which is shaded with dark screen, and I can sit down, be still, and wait for birds to come down to my feeder, and I can trigger that remote trigger just by pressing a button with my thumb. Now, if you attempt something like this and you find that the birds aren't coming down, don't worry. Birds tend to be skeptical of new things in their environment. So you can leave the tripod there, or you can set it up multiple days in a row. But eventually, birds will become comfortable with the tripod being present, and they will come to feed again. Or maybe you'll luck out like I did. My birds don't really have a care in the world about my tripod, and as long as I'm not physically out there, they will readily come down to my feeder. Other considerations, you want to silence your phone. You don't want to miss a shot because you got a call or a notification at an inopportune time. You also don't want to look directly at your subject. You'll look like a predator that wants to eat it. And you can't bait your subjects. Now, obviously, this doesn't apply to backyard feeders, but it's perfectly fine to set yourself up somewhere where you know black skimmers will come through and feed, or near a fresh carcass waiting for turkey vultures to descend. But it's never okay to put any type of attractant out yourself. It's also generally frowned upon to try and lure birds in with recordings of their call, especially during breeding season. Use flash sparingly, if at all. If you're shooting during the day, a flash shouldn't be necessary, and you should not use a flash on nocturnal birds during the night. If you plan to share your photos and their locations, be aware of the impact of doing so, especially for rare or sought-after species. An influx of birders or photographers can have adverse impacts on your subject's habitat. If you go off trail, be cognizant of where you tread. Remember to leave no trace. Don't use drones. It's not legal to fly in many places where wildlife is abundant anyway. If you're photographing nesting shorebirds, don't situate yourself between the nest and the water. the need to get to the water line to feed. Some final thoughts I want to leave you with are: bring binoculars. Even if the bird is out of reach of your lens, you can still appreciate the sight. And in a pinch, you can use the binoculars like a zoom lens in combination with a cell phone. To that end, don't be disappointed if you miss a shot. Sometimes I'll intentionally not take any pictures and instead just watch and admire. Other resources that can be helpful starting your birding photography journey are Bringing Home Nature by Doug Tallamy. This book can help you create a backyard habitat that will attract birds as well as other wildlife. The Audubon Society. They have great information about many things bird-related, including more comprehensive photography and birding information than what was presented here. And Merlin, which is a bird ID app from the Cornell lab that I still use pretty much every time I go shooting because I'm still coming across birds I'm not familiar with. Also, if you've liked the photos you've seen during this video and you want to see more, feel free to follow me on Instagram at Earth and Serpents, all one word. And that's it. Thank you for watching. Good luck and have fun.